Well, as week 0 was going on yesterday, there was some realignment news, a few murmurs still going on. This Stanford and Cal situation, it's like a slow-moving virus. It just will not get out of our systems, and we have this Stanford and Cal reportedly exploring the possibility of trying to join the Big 12. I also heard the idea that the Big 12 is going to make a big expansion, also including Washington State and Oregon State to push their conference to 20 teams. Kind of curious, although I will say one of the teams the Big 12 is targeting, San Diego State, if you take a look at their game yesterday, and we understand, it's against Ohio University, but they came into that game as 3-point favorites. The attendance was really bad. They tried making excuses saying, it was because of the sun. But that was not a good showing by San Diego State. And I think San Diego State's going to be really bad this year. So you do have to wonder if San Diego State really has a bad year with poor attendance, does that make them less valuable? You can't base things off of one season. We get that when it comes to accepting teams into your conference, but it's just something to follow. I thought it was kind of a disappointing start for San Diego State based off of their attendance, and also the only reason they won that game was because Ohio's returning quarterback, who everyone loves, he got injured early on, and they won by 7 points. They only scored 20 points offensively. But yeah, apparently, at least from this, the whole idea of the Big 12 now being open. Well, the Big 12 has always been open to adding Stanford and possibly Cal. The sticking point was they didn't want Washington State and Oregon State, and Stanford said, no, we're based on academics. We don't want to join the Big 12. We think we're better than the Big 12. And it says, despite various reports, the Big 12 has not had conversations with any of the Pac-4 schools and has no intention on engaging with those schools, according to multiple Big 12 sources, which kind of surprises me a little bit. There was a rumor that the Big 12 offered Stanford a spot in the conference, and Stanford straight up denied them. So there's a lot of different erroneous reports going on right now, but the Big 12 has maintained, after they added the 4 corner schools, that they were done, possibly going to be open to adding more teams next offseason to get to 18 teams, or maybe even 20 teams, depending on what happens with the ACC. Maybe the Big 12 is saying, let's keep our options open. Maybe there's a team, in the ACC that we would want more that may come available. But you also have to think, if you are the Big 12, I would still be open to Stanford. I know a lot of people are like, oh, don't let Stanford in now. They already denied you. But Stanford is a very impressive program. And it still seems like Stanford, in terms of just fit based on academics, is better in the ACC. Same thing with Cal. The travel would just not work. It's a lot easier in terms of travel if Stanford, Cal go to the Big 12. But I do think Washington State and Oregon State would be better fits in the Big 12. At this point, Washington State and Oregon State are just trying to go anywhere in any Power 4 conference. They are also in talks with both the American and the Mountain West. Seems like it would make a lot more sense for them to join the Mountain West based on the TV deal, based on the location. The Mountain West will be renegotiating in 2026. The American Conference is stuck with their $9 million per year TV deal until, I believe, 2032. So I would expect Oregon State and Washington State to wind up in the Mountain West. This could also be a scenario, and this was my original thought before the whole Stanford to the ACC thing. Other people are talking about this now. Why doesn't Stanford just wait for the Big Ten? And I guess the answer to that is the Big Ten has said we're not interested. It seems like at this point the Big Ten is only adding teams that are going to bring added value to their conference. And while Stanford, they're a great team in terms of the academics, we get it. When it comes to college football in this day and age, they're just not good enough with all the NIL stuff. They don't want to do it. All the academic requirements to join it. A lot of kids, it's going to hurt their recruiting significantly. And then Cal, of course, I feel like there was never any chance Cal was joining the Big Ten. They haven't been good in college football in forever. They would not add much to the conference outside of the academics and also possibly the location. But if you're the Big Ten, do you need more teams in the state of California after USC and UCLA? Why not try and go down to Miami and get them or another team in the state of Florida. I don't think they'll be able to get FSU based on the entanglement that ESPN has right now with the SEC and the ACC. FSU is either staying in the ACC or going to the Big Ten, but there were some reports on that. And then another big thing that came out, Arizona State has instituted a bowl ban onto themselves this year. And the most curious thing about this bowl ban, the investigation stems in part from a dossier of documents sent to the NCAA in May of 2021 detailing repeated recruiting violations, including multiple instances of ignoring restrictions implemented during the pandemic dead period. Does that remind you of anything? That's a very similar situation to what is going on with the University of Michigan. And that Michigan story is just a total joke. Michigan is now, not only have they done the 3-game self-imposed suspension onto Harbaugh, now they're extending it to some of the coordinators. And you can see Michigan fans very pissed off. But if you're Michigan, this is exactly what you have to do. You've got to be worried and scared to death if Arizona State does. Now, listen, I don't know the exact charges against Michigan, but it was something similar to contacting recruits during the pandemic dead period. And Arizona State says, listen, we'll just self-bowl ban ourselves. We're not going to be very good this year. Our ceiling is probably 6-6, but realistically, it's probably going to be worse, so we'll take the bowl ban. If you are Michigan, yeah, you're going to have to penalize yourself pretty significantly, because that is something I would be scared to death if I was them possibly facing a bowl ban. That would be terrible. That's why Michigan's trying to get out ahead of it. I think it is a complete joke that Michigan has decided to impose the 3-game suspension on Harbaugh. The 3 teams they're facing are horrible, and now they're doing a make-a-wish. You get to coach the first half, then the other assistant gets to coach the second half, and then you get to coach the third quarter, and it's just such a charade, and it's terrible for college football. But I believe one of the coaches that was supposed to coach one of the games, because Michigan has like 4 different assistant coaches that they want to install as their head coach over the first 3 games. I believe one of those coaches they've suspended for a game. So this whole thing is a complete mess. But if I was Michigan, just try and suspend as many coaches as possible. Do whatever you have to do. You're facing teams. You really don't even need a head coach on the sideline to beat Bowling Green or UNLV. Let's be honest. So, I would be scared. Arizona State, I don't know if it's an exact same type of infraction. Maybe Arizona State's was a lot more egregious. Maybe not. That's to be determined. But it does seem like Michigan, it's just a curious spot. The idea was Harbaugh was going to get a 4-game suspension. And honestly, that would have been, for Michigan, completely fine, because their 4th game is against Rutgers at home. So that's really not an issue. But then they pushed it back and said, no, we'll deal with you next year. And then Michigan's like, whoa. Let's actually deal with this right now, because next year we face Texas week 2 in terms of our non-conference. And also everyone was thinking, well, maybe Harbaugh will just leave back for the NFL before he faces punishment next year, but they are imposing the 3-game suspension on him right now. So that's just the story surrounding that. And then I saw this metric that the Big 12 is now touting, average watchability. And this is kind of a gimmick metric, but the Big 12, you've got Kansas State at number 1, LSU, Utah, Texas Tech. This is basically a metric, and it tracks, I'm guessing, every single one of your games. And take, for example, Ohio State at number 26 or Oregon at number 28. Both of those teams face FCS teams, so that's going to bring their average watchability way down, because not many people are going to be watching Ohio State versus Youngstown State. Not many people are going to be watching Oregon versus Portland State. So I think this is kind of a gimmick, honestly. Do we really think Kansas State is the most watchable team? I understand maybe they have the most competitive schedule in terms of that, but I just don't think this is a very good rating. I will say the Big 12 Conference, there's really no insanely weak team. For a while there, it was always Kansas football, and then for about 2 years, it was Baylor, but seems like Kansas a lot better now. Baylor is obviously significantly better. And it is a conference, while they have no super good teams, there's really no ultra weak teams. It's a very stable conference, the Big 12 is. What would an addition of Stanford and Cal do? I mean, honestly, Stanford and Cal would be two of the bottom teams in that conference. Both Stanford and Cal are not good at football. That's part of the issue with Stanford and Cal trying to join one of these leagues, and the big issue that they've had in that. Although I do still think Stanford and Cal probably going to the ACC. It's probably going to get done. I mean, it has to get done by this week, you would think. Week 0 doesn't really count in terms of the season starting. Personally, I don't think so. You know, it feels like we still are in the preseason mode. And then we get this deal done. We finally finish the realignment this coming week. The final bow. Stanford, Cal, SMU, all possibly going to the ACC, and that ends that. If it doesn't happen, it opens up a bevy of questions about what happens next year to the scheduling. But honestly, even if they join the ACC, you've got massive questions about Oregon State and Washington State. Either way, the thing is one giant mess that we thought was going to be solved. It's like 10 days into this whole thing where every day they're so close to joining the ACC, so close to joining the ACC, and then yesterday it comes out, maybe the Big 12 is back in the picture, but now the Big 12 denies it, and it still looks like the ACC is the most likely play. Although the one big trepidation for the ACC, the travel just makes completely no sense. If it's just going to be 2 California teams and then maybe SMU, I guess you are getting a team out of Texas, but either way, we'll have to see what happens. I think it gets wrapped up this week, but that's going to do it for this video. Make sure you follow me on X. Link to that's always in the description.